And I will show wonders in heaven above, and signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before that great and notable day of the Lord come. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. The Acts of the Apostles is not a book of symbols, but is a literal description of what began to happen from the resurrection to Pentecost, and then during the life of the early church in the era of the apostles, or at least until the death of the Apostle Paul. Now, many, perhaps most, Bible students believe that St. John survived St. Paul, though there are arguments. Now, this argument is tacitly based upon the feeling that Revelation was the last written book of the Bible and must certainly have been the latest of the biblical events recorded. But this is theology by rote, by hunch, and by popular vote, as is so often the case in issues of eschatological content. In my view, it was clearly St. John and the phenomena that led to the book of Revelation that St. Paul describes in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 1 to 5, where he writes, "It is not expedient for me, doubtless, to glory. I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago, whether in the body or out of the body. Whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell, God knoweth. Such an one caught up to the third heaven. And I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body I cannot tell, God knoweth, how that he was caught up into paradise, and heard unspeakable words, which is not lawful for a man to utter. Of such a one will I glory, yet of myself I will not glory, but in my infirmities." Well, this would tend to indicate to me that St. Paul was alive at least 14 years after St. John had the revelation experience. This man that St. Paul knew 14 years earlier, concerning whom he does not now know if he is still alive or dead, fits only and fits perfectly the information given concerning the Apostle John. He was caught up into paradise, and he heard things that were not lawful for him to relate. The first chapter of Revelation tells us that St. John was caught up into heaven, and cried with a loud voice, the third verse says, as when a lion roareth, and when he had cried, the seven thunders uttered their voice, and when the seven thunders uttered their voices, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Seal up those things which the seven thunders uttered, and write them not. Here St. John heard words that were not lawful for him to repeat, and he was told not to write them down, but to seal them up. There is no doubt in my mind that St. John is the one of whom St. Paul speaks. But whomever it was, there is one thing that is certain. It was not St. Paul himself of whom he is writing. The apostle says that it was 14 years ago, and he doesn't know if this man is still alive. He says that he will glory in the experiences of that man and not of himself and his own experiences. As an aside, it's amazing to me how Christian teachers feel the complete liberty to call St. Paul a liar and a deceiver here, and say that it was himself of whom he was speaking. It was himself, somehow, and he was being modest about it. If it was himself, how could he say that it was 14 years ago and he does not know if the man is still alive? And how could he say, of such an one I will glory, yet of myself I will not glory. Clearly, the apostle speaks of another man and not of himself. And while it's not stated that it's St. John of whom he speaks, John is the only one in the Bible that we know of who fits this description. And while we're on the subject, let me issue this word of caution. In 2 Corinthians 12, verses 3 and 4, which we just read, a simple analysis of the passage tells us that the apostle has said two things. First, it was 14 years ago, and he didn't know if this man is still in the body or not. Well, why did he phrase it that way? Well, of course, Paul knew the man was still alive somewhere, but he didn't know if he was still alive mortally, or in other words, in this earth, in his mortal body. Then he says that the man was caught up into paradise, and he cannot tell if he was caught up in his body or if he went only in spirit. In other words, St. Paul, after having talked with St. John about his experience, could not tell if John was caught up in his body into paradise or if he was caught up in spirit only. And this means obviously that St. John, or whoever the other man was, didn't know himself if he was in his body or if he was taken up in spirit only. Now, if St. John did not know that this was an out-of-the-body experience, and if St. Paul did not know if it was an out-of-the-body experience, how do you think that you or any other man is to know? This means, listen carefully, this means that the only passage where the out-of-the-body crowd thinks they have license for their claims is not that at all. Neither of the apostles knew. Therefore, this passage, which is not teaching out-of-the-body experiences in any case, cannot legitimately be used to support the dishonest, boastful, and false claims that are being made today. It's another case of blown religious minds hallucinating, either that or outright misrepresentations, which is most often the case. These are not out-of-the-body experiences, they are out-of-the-mind experiences. Now, St. Paul was older than St. John, and in Philemon chapter 1, verse 9, the apostle describes himself as Paul the Aged. I conclude, therefore, that St. John's experiences, as described in Revelation, was more than 14 years before the death of St. Paul, and that St. Paul's death in Rome was the end of the era of the original apostles. Now, if that is the case, then the Acts of the Apostles spans the entire era of the apostles, as the title of the book would seem to indicate. However, if that is an accurate analysis, or if it's not, and we don't know for sure that the man in 2 Corinthians 12, 1-5 is St. John, we do know it isn't St. Paul if we've got good sense. It does not change the message of the book. Picking up from last time, there was a great earthquake. Well, earthquakes are quite prominent in the Scriptures. The first mention in the Bible has to do with the great flood. Perhaps the first manifestation to which doctrinal importance is attached was at Mount Sinai when God was on the mountain. It was a testimony of God's awesome power, His majesty, and His wrath. We're told in Hebrews 12 that it was a terrible sight. Earthquakes throughout the Old Testament were an indication of God's judgment, His presence, and His power. Another earthquake of biblical significance took place in the days of Uzziah, who was king of Judah, and Joash, who was king of Israel. Now that earthquake is recorded in Amos chapter 1 and verse 1, and in Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 5. Little is told about it, but it must have been some earthquake to get this kind of biblical mention. The greatest in history was the earthquake that took place at the crucifixion of Christ, and we talked about it and the phenomena connected with it last time. But while there was an earthquake, and it was a great one, and while the book of Acts is not primarily symbolic, that does not preclude symbolism. And since, in my view, the moon turning into blood is symbolic and not literal, I wish to look at some of these symbolic, prophetic, metaphorical properties of these phenomena for a while this morning. In our studies in Revelation that we recently did, we discovered that one of the meanings of the shaking up of everything was the change in the covenants. In previous times, God had dealt with man in patience, long-suffering, and tolerance, because there was nothing he could do with men on this earth in terms of changing their nature, not until the crucifixion of Christ. The resurrection and the sending down of the Holy Ghost changed that. But before that, God said in Genesis 6:3, what am I going to do? I can beat him to death, and I'm not going to change him. He's only flesh. I'll have to make room for him. Either that, or I'll have to destroy him. It's that simple. Now, God gave serious consideration to the matter of destroying man in the days before the flood. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, and he decided against doing that. Yet God's patience with men in the days before the New Testament time was never intended to be understood as a tolerance by God of man's evils or for their rebellion against him and against his laws. Indeed, the whole problem between God and man was created by the fact that man rebelled against God and his rules. As soon as the situation developed by Christ's life, his crucifixion, his resurrection, and the entrance of the New Testament into history, so that it was no longer necessary for man to be a rebel against God, things changed. All of the provision necessary to change man had been made. Now, man's blasphemy, mockery, rebellion, and disobedience is no longer tolerated by God in that same way. The earthquake here identifies the changing of the natural order, the upsetting of all that had gone before, the turning upside down of the natural realm as it existed in the days of antiquity. God was patient in the past, but now the problems of fallen men are no longer excusable. And then the sun became dark. Well, this too was literally manifested at the crucifixion when there was darkness over the whole earth. But the meaning goes much further. In Isaiah 5 verses 20 through 25, it's noted that evil men called darkness light and light darkness. Yet while it is in the nature of evil men to live in the darkness, it is still a judgment of God upon them. The sun was given to rule the day, but in the fallen society of men in our time, there is no more day in that sense. These are creatures of the dark and of the night. The moral and spiritual light has been taken from them by Almighty God. Jesus made this evaluation of the human race when he said, "This is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil." That's John 3:19. They came out to take Jesus at night, and he said to them, "Darkness is your hour. You are creatures of the darkness, men of dark deeds. You like the darkness, the moral, spiritual, and intellectual darkness." Well, you may feel that I must be jesting. In this age, men like intellectual darkness? Oh yes, they like intellectual darkness, indeed they do. All you need to do is read the first chapter of Romans, where St. Paul said that when they knew God, they glorified Him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like unto corruptible man, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. This is an apostolic indictment of the demonic and demented theories of evolution and other unbiblical concepts of origins. There is no more day in the natural realm. There is only night. God has decreed this. He has done it. He has taken the light from them as a judgment because they did not like the light. The sun has become black as a sackcloth of hair, and the moon into blood. Now, I personally see no literal fulfillment for this prophecy either in the past or in the future, but I do see much in the realms of the symbolic, the prophetic, and the metaphorical. In the original creation, the night was a time of rest. It was a time to sit on the porch in the silvery light and listen to the crickets at the mill pond. It was a time to gather the family around the fire and read and sing and visit and enjoy the restfulness and the recharging of one's physical capacities that came with the night, a gracious time. But mortal man has turned it into a time of fiends, of evil, of violence, and of distortion, and deviations of all sorts. Instead of the silvery light of the moon, we have blood on the moon in the modern society of men. There is no peace and no rest. The night is a time now for monkey business, for slipping around, and every kind of evil. It is also a time for fear and for wishing for the dawn. Now, while it's not mentioned here, in Revelation we are told that the stars fell. In the first chapter of that great book, we're told that the 7 stars are the leaders of the churches. The stars were to give light upon the earth and to give guidance of times, seasons, days, and years, and directions for the mariner on the sea or the scout on the mountain. Stars are the symbols of leaders. But in the natural society of mortal man, there are no more wise men. The stars fell from heaven. The wise men turned into fools. There are no more spiritual, moral, social, and intellectual leaders in secular society. And there is no valid leadership coming from the world of religious humanism. Men have gone back to building the Tower of Babel. You thought we forgot it, God. You thought we had given it up, but we never forgot it. And now we're going to build that tower, and instead of bricks and mortar, we're going to do it with spaceships and rocketry and nuclear power. We're going to go a lot further and a lot faster than Nimrod went. But my friends, it's the same foolish, demented thing. What has man done with his wisdom? St. Paul asks the question, where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world? Has God not turned the wisdom of the wise into foolishness? Well, we hear that education is the answer. Education is the answer to nothing. Nothing. Education is the disseminating of the ideas, the notions, the blasphemies, and the mockeries of fools. What we are doing by education is teaching every child how to make a bomb, how to be a criminal, how to peddle drugs, and how to be immoral. Sex education classes have become manuals on how to do it. And now old child masters want to get hold on our little boys and teach them how to be perverts. What they are teaching people is the lie. Education is a very distinct and pronounced part of the problem today. Men do not know what the race was created for. As in the case of the ancient Tower of Babel, so with the modern Tower of Babel, men have the wrong idea of greatness and achievement. In the past, this activity, though always doomed to failure, was authorized as a feature of the covenant of flesh, man trying to find his way to God by himself. But this is not the case anymore. Christ, the consummate man, came into this world to show men what God intended man to be, and he was rejected by everyone. First, he was rejected by the religious world, who hated him most of all. Then by the social world, then by the intellectuals, then by the politicians, finally by the military leaders and the courts and the so-called justice system. Everybody rejected Jesus Christ. He was in the world. The world was made by him. No man has seen God at any time, but the only begotten of the Father has revealed him unto us. He was the consummate man, the ultimate living example for the human race of what man is supposed to be, and nobody wanted anything to do with him. At Pentecost, an end was put to this hapless and hopeless business. No man will see Christ or truth until he comes by faith and by the way of the cross. This all has to do with the new covenant that was established at the very time and by the very events of our study. Now, these phenomena, whether literal or symbolic, are in the Bible to tell us that the old creation came crashing down at the crucifixion, the resurrection, and Pentecost, and the time of the new creation has come. God is no longer interested in this old creation. Do you hear me? I say God is no longer interested in this old creation, and that includes all of you fools who are trying to lead Christians in some sort of political reformation of this country, which is not God's country, is not Christian, and never was, and you will not make a Christian country out of it, no matter how hard you try, because the Old Testament failed and Pentecost put an end to it. His kingdom is no longer of this world. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil has failed. Failed, do you hear me? The fig tree, the tree in the garden, has withered up to its roots, and with the curse put on it by Jesus Christ to stay that way forever. Natural man, be he religious or secular, can continue to stare into the darkness or to look with the natural sight to the brazen heavens if he wishes to do so. But if he does, it is his own foolish error. If any man is in Christ, he is of the new creation. The old creation is gone, and everything is new, and everything is of God. The signs predicted by the prophet Joel and that took place in and around the day of Pentecost, in at least one important consideration, has given us that assurance. Christ has been raised up to the throne. He has been enshrined upon it and will remain in that position of power and glory forever. Pentecost teaches us that too, as we shall shortly see.